So welcome to today's episode of the Total Innovation Podcast. This episode is super exciting for me because it's a long-standing friend of Wazoku who's joining us. She's an advisor on challenge-driven innovation, the co-author of the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook. She's currently driving corporate exploration and innovation at Lloyds Banking Group. And as I've said, she's a long-term friend of Wazoku's. So very much welcome, Bea Schofield.
Well, thank you for having me.
So Bea, it's been a busy week, hey? We were just catching up before this recording. For folk that don't know you, and they really should check you out. There aren't many that have trodden so many different sides of this innovation conundrum. Can you just set the scene a little bit? Tell people a bit about you. I gave that high level introduction, but tell them about Bea the innovator.
Oh, lovely. Well, actually, I have you to thank for piquing my initial interest in innovation, and particularly challenge-driven innovation, after spending many happy years at Wazoku working with organizations to build and scale sustainable innovation management programs by tapping into the power of both internal and external crowds to make what is inherently a very complex process a lot more efficient. So that's really where my journey started with innovation, particularly interested from both internal and external perspectives on how to tap in, as I said, to that long tail of potential problem solvers. And for the past, I think, coming up to 16 months in-house doing the job within a central innovation team, sitting within CTO, to actually help build that muscle and support the organization, specifically focused on the insurance, pensions and investment business, but also how do we identify important problems to solve? How do we get into a process of running short experiments to be able to prove if there's something there? Can it if there's something? And in parallel to that, help to build really the architecture to enable more innovation at scale versus just thinking, which often a lot of leaders do, that you say innovate and it just happens magically. So, yeah, a few things that I do.
You've taken the leap from the dark side to the light side, or maybe it's the other way around.
The other way around.
The other way around. And I'm sure there's a million and one lessons from both sides of that, right? Which could probably be another podcast all unto itself. There's a million things you and I could talk about. The purpose of this podcast is to try and go as deep as we can with sort of practical advice on quite a close thematic, right? Like this is such a broad topic area, as you've said. I thought, knowing you as I did, that we'd unpack this in a couple of ways and really lean into this, the sort of the trilateral things of your experience around your background with us and challenge-driven innovation, the book that you were part of helping to write last year, which I know was quite an achievement and also has landed very well in the market, and your role now at Lloyds, and start to think about this. So you've got this role within the CTO's office, right, which sounds very much like a centralized function. So can you talk to us a little bit around that and what your experience is on something that I know you and I threw around a lot, the other side of the fence of, this constant challenge and dance of centralized versus decentralized innovation?
Yeah, so it's interesting being within CTO. I know that's not uncommon in financial services, and it has advantages and disadvantages. So we are part of the group kind of chief operating office, so that you really become what we think of as a conventional central innovation team. And actually, historically, the team I'm part of was more akin to what we would think of as a central innovation team operating as a lab to be able to explore new business models. And it was actually part of a restructure that the team ended up within CTO. That has advantages and disadvantages in that, as we know, being able to leverage both new and emerging technologies to provide value is actually fundamental. And I don't think you can decouple now innovation from technology. But again, the disadvantage, of course, is that it becomes too technology centric. So I think in order for any innovation team to succeed within a CTO, you've got to understand the technology within the wider sort of socio-economic, political landscape in which those technologies are appearing, because that's really where you're able to better understand how might we use technology to be able to provide value, either through improving what we do today, better serving existing markets, or to edge more into what we think of as horizon 2 and adjacent markets. So I think from a positioning perspective, it has advantages. You just have to be very certain to the business this is not just purely about technology. And similarly, tell your colleagues in CTO, innovation isn't just technology, it's the application of technology to better solve problems. And you might even find that some of those problems aren't even solved. Your question around the sort of modeling. So we often think about the sort of 3 different models how innovation teams run. There's really fully centralized, typically where you've got a lot of really deep expertise. You might find that more in pharma. You have the sort of more federated, which in an organization such as Lloyds, as all the different businesses do it themselves, or which we've really opted for with the hybrid. So you have more of an interface between the business. So I think an analogy which I find helps people is thinking about sustainability. You could just have a sustainability, but you recognize what you're really trying to do is get more ESG focus in every element of what the business does. That might be proposition development, it might be operating models, it might be process improvements. So you have to be able to understand the needs of the organization and have that sort of enterprise-wide view, but also able to contextualize the application of innovation methods to the specific business, which is where I feel we are certainly entering as a innovation team of what is really organization-wise, but also what's quite specific.
I know you referenced earlier, and I know this is a matrix or a view that you use in some of your presentations, is that very much that not just the 3 horizon thinking, but this mix between capabilities that you have and markets that you serve today, all the way out to capabilities you do not have and markets that don't even exist, right? That's sort of the multiple different types of innovation. Before you get into the what that mix might look like inside your business from a portfolio perspective, how well understood do you think that whole topic is? It's interesting we lean into another example like sustainability rather than using innovation, because I get the feeling we do that because people can get their head around it a bit more, right? And like, how well understood do you think the topic is? I spoke to Aidan McCullen in the first podcast in this season, and he spoke about one of the most important moments for him is the professionalization of rugby as a sport in its massive evolution in the way that health and what not just total innovation in this case, but sort of total rugby as a concept really evolved around the time that it became a professional sport, not an amateur sport. And I posited the question to him: do you think innovation will ever professionalize? Slightly tongue in cheek, of course, right? But yeah, how well understood do you think it is across the business?
So I'd say very, very poorly understood. In the ask anyone what it means, and you will get a significantly different answer. Someone might say it is just a behavior. Someone might say I innovated by painting the walls a different color. So actually understanding that it is not just curiosity or innovative thinking, but it's actually a process through which organizations are able to realize value by building hypotheses and running experiments and simply ruling out what doesn't work and building on what does work. I would say that was very, very poorly understood by large organizations.
Yeah, not very well centrally visualized or managed either, I guess, right? It's really hard to get your arms around the myriad of things that are happening or are not happening in the business.
Yeah.
So what specifically is the role of your innovation office and in this CTO's office then?
So we see it as our role to enable the group to innovate at scale by providing the relevant tools and capabilities to enable people to get idea through to impact, to run experiments, and to be able to leverage the advantages that the organization has to compete and to stay relevant in order to ensure that we remain relevant in the eyes of our customers. So think about it more as a center of enablement through which more people can do innovation versus a lab where it is restricted to a finite number of people.
This concept of a center of enablement's a nice one, right? Something we should probably pull on a little bit. Like, what does that mean? Do you think? I read into it. It means that you're not a team of innovation doers in that nice sense, right? You guys are not necessarily the ones doing the innovation. You're trying to help the business to do the innovation, I guess, in a more systemic and systematic and repeatable way. But why don't you explain that a little bit?
So I think it's interesting because we often say to enable, it's part doing and part enabling. So with something where it is a relatively new process or skill that someone's trying to say, I think there's something over here, can I go and investigate it a little bit more? Often the approach you need to take is to be very guided and very hands-on and almost talk people through. Now, in the same way, when someone's done it with you once, it's more light touch, in the next innovation cycle, and then more and more light touch to the point where you simply are just capabilities. So I think thinking of center enablement, the vision, of course, is to have, I think with most center of enablement or excellence, is that there's a sort of front door, more of a push and pull. You can access relevant recent research, you can have digital innovation tools. And that's actually something you should be aspired to. I'd argue you need to go a step further and that people just innovate without a center of enablement. But I think the reality of that happening is very, very small, which is why it's actually quite a key area to have within an organization. So I think that's sort of a view as to what it is and how it should work, and that you actually need to be within that context, have a really good foot into the outside world of innovation management, because that's always changing as well. So you need to be able to have that foot in and say, what should we be thinking about as innovation management people in order to ensure our business can innovate better?
So if we dig into the topic a little bit more deeply then and get a bit more hands-on practical, right? Like one of the things that comes out in the book, you wrote a chapter on challenge-driven innovation, and I'd like to delve into that a little bit. But before you get to sort of defining the challenge, is I guess where do we innovate, right? There's 1,000,001 different places, problem areas. They're called hunting zones in the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook that you co-authored. So talk to me about these hunting zones, and if you can, be as apply it to Lloyds, right? Like from perspective.
So in the concept, right, the sort of by hunting zones are really talking about ensuring that there is focus. So rather than unbounded innovation where anyone can come up with any idea, what we're looking to identify at the very start is the areas to explore which have the highest degree of sponsorship. Because if you do not have sponsorship to even explore the area, the likelihood is you're not going to get up an idea, develop that idea, and pitch that idea, which is all quite a lengthy process and quite a lot resource intensive. So firstly, and I take very much the view that you can start anywhere. Now, your exploration zones or your hunting zones might be that you've uncovered through existing research a very high value customer problem. It might be to do with the fact that younger people simply aren't getting on the housing ladder in the way that they used to, and you need to find a way to help them do that. It's a potentially very high value customer problem to solve in an organization like Lloyds. You may also say we've already got some capabilities, some technology, some data that we can, will provide us some value that we can monetize. So that might be potentially another area for you, starting with those capabilities. But I think in my kind of world where I'm focused, I'm specifically starting with if let's say an area of the business is not sure where to start, the easiest starting point is to look at either emerging trends or even more relevant mega trends, and be able to say which of these trends do you think will either impact your revenue streams in the future or provide you with an opportunity to actually create products to help to attract and retain your next generation of customers. So depending on the type of business you're looking at, it might be very relevant to Gen Z and actually what behaviors, traits are we seeing? What are the needs and emerging needs of that particular potential customer base that we will need to meet in order to ensure that they actually, don't just go and join another neobank in reality. And then I think the rather than dictating what you feel the hunting zone is for the organization, I always say my expertise is simply in the process. It is not in the trends that I am deep diving into, is to provide a picture of what the world might look like in 5 years' time, and then get the people who know their business the best to say what opportunities and threats this present, because they'll tell you will be able to do it in 15 minutes compared to me trying to identify all the potential threats to a business that I don't know. And that, I think, begins to shape that landscape of potential opportunities.
And I think that alignment between the center of enablement, bringing the process and the skills of the how aligned to the subject matter experts of the what and the where is a nice way of positioning it. I guess you're still always going to be competing in this landscape of, I guess, on the one side, interest, preference, and ego, and on the other side, still too few resources, too many problems, right? And maybe on the third side is the AI, everything must be AI bouts as well, right? Of like, all resources are suddenly being pulled in that direction and not necessarily others. So how do you think about prioritizing those hunting zones and then weaving that into the CDI sort of narrative, challenge-driven innovation narrative as well?
Yeah, so I think around prioritizing, there are loads of potential areas that you might explore. And I think to ensure that it's of a priority, you want to explore an area which will have both near-term and longer-term impact. So it's something that is a concern of you and is relevant to you because it's likely already linked to a problem that you want to solve in the near term, as well as providing you the breadth to explore that in the long term. So it might be particularly with a specific segment of users, and you go, I need to find out more about them now because I'm already seeing that they're not buying what I'm selling them. But I also need to use that to be able to think about how I might serve that market in the future. And really from a CDI perspective is if you were to look at the hunting zones, I think once you've identified a mega trend or a problem that you want to explore, that really is the goal or opportunity area that sits at the front part of the CDI process. And then what you need to be able to do is identify the challenge areas that sit within that broader macro trend. So that really ensures that you could be, let's say, dealing with the sandwich generation of parents who are perhaps stuck, dealing with, helping to support elderly parents who've got kids that are still living at home well into their 20s. And there might be several challenge areas within that particular, how do we help this particular group of people? Might be on a challenge related to that, might be, are we providing them enough, might they need in-house care support for their aging parents? How might we retrofit their houses as people move in and out? Those are all different challenges that sit within those. And I think you need to take that prioritization and say, what is the particular problem? And let's kick the tires and see if there's anything here.
And beyond tech and beyond digital as well, are you seeing, or would you say that most of the type of work that's happening is still very tech and digital?
So I think with at least, and I learned this at the Innovators Conference last week, is probably the most sold out sessions are always how are we using generative AI, either as part of our innovation process or to be able to better serve existing markets. So that seems to be what people are predominantly talking about from a technology perspective. But again, that's just focused on the technology piece. If you go into the business, the likelihood is the business is beginning to explore areas more incremental in nature and using those technologies. And what I'm, getting tired of hearing is Gen AI is the solution. What's the problem? Because I think they've completely done it the wrong way around. Is we have to be really good at understanding what the specific problems are and breaking those down into experiments, and then say, what is the technology? Because guarantee most of the time it is not generative AI.
Yes, I think there's an inevitable hype there right now, right? But there's also a curiosity, I think, right? And like there is an element of, if people want to get in and learn and be curious, then that is sort of the innovator's dream, right? Like we'd love people to be loving their problem spaces and really interested in helping. If AI can help to really frame that bit rather than racing to the solution, then fantastic. Actually, I think that really will unlock more value as we go forward. What is your philosophy on the role of AI in innovation? Then I think we can't dodge it too much. And what's the position internally on it?
But it's interesting, and actually, I believe in looking at all the different use cases, how innovation teams are using it as more of a co-pilot. So how might we generate ideas? How might we help to reduce the amount of time doing the least interesting part, namely the desk research? Are interesting use cases of it. What again, though, and I think this applies as much to innovation teams as business teams who are looking to use generative AI, is pick one or two things and run proper experiments. There are potentially a million things you could use, ways you could use it in the innovation process, but start with the problem. What is the most labor intensive? Where do you feel your creativity is being drained? Then potentially use it as a means of helping with that innovation process, and actually maybe even use it as an opportunity to get your business areas actually using Gen AI when they're learning to innovate, because that again might help them adopt the process by saying, look, it's not all just hours and hours and hours. You can actually use this emerging technology to solve your emerging business problem in order to create sort of emerging products for your future markets. There are lots of different ways, but as I say, don't focus specifically just on the technology.
One of the I'm going to slowly bring us towards a close because I respect your time on this as well. One of the things that we constantly used to talk about when you were on this side of the fence, and now I'm very fascinated on how you think about it on that side of the fence, is, you spoke about the path to value earlier, right? So what are the metrics here, right? We're seeing innovation teams often very frustrated, often struggle. This is one of those economic cycles now where some innovation teams are being pushed to prove value or being shrunk or disbanded. Feels like there's a strong investment in this center of enablement and innovation across the business you're working in. But how should we be thinking about measuring the value creation here, and how do you think about it internally?
So when I often say, which I start most presentations with new, and I use a very perhaps overly generic Jeff Bezos, which says, why is Amazon as good as it is? Why is it as innovative as it is? And everyone says always the same answer, say, it's got, understand its customers. And actually it's quoted as saying, if you dramatically increase the number of experiments you do, the likelihood is you will dramatically increase the new innovations you produce. And I think that people fail. They say new innovations produced equals ROI versus that metric, which is absolutely critical, that I believe comes before it, is, can I see an increase in the amount of experiments that we're doing? Because if we know that it's a 15-to-1 for a new product, what am I actually looking at first? And where teams as mine such as struggle is you apply very traditional ROI metrics to innovation versus saying, let's just think about increasing the number of experiments. And then that if you have to increase the number of experiments, people have to be aware of what even experimentation is. I actually sometimes find that easier, explore and experiment than innovation, for that reason.
ultimately, though, there does need to be a value creation, I guess, right? And that you've spoken a little bit about blending the near-term priority of I've got a problem today linked to a broader term macro thematic. And I guess to a degree that can lend you into a value creation if I solve something towards a longer term something. But those horizons they're difficult, right? We're very trained today in quarterly performance metrics and everything else. And obviously innovation runs counter to that. But there is a value that has to come eventually, I guess.
And actually, that's a good point. Is where if people, particularly when you're looking as one of the potentially other area, I think this is the fourth one, is attractive markets. It's very easy to generate interest in what you're trying to explore by showing market size today and expected growth. You do not have to look far to find those predicted growth. You don't need to have a license to a pitch book. Most of the big consultancies are frequently publishing data around market growth. So use that data to gain interest and then show your increasing confidence that you are edging towards entering that market and have a right to play in that market and can capitalize on the resources you have in order to get that ROI. But I can't say it's easy. I feel it's where 90% of all our time is spent, is trying to convince someone that this is a valuable activity. And I don't see that going away anytime soon, although I wish it was. And I think some of these organizations will go before the people realize that actually they could have just been looking at that all along.
Yeah, I think there's something in that that's about education as well as you're talking through it. Because I'm sitting here with my CEO's cap on, thinking if I'm running this business and there's tens of thousands of people all out doing experiments, and I've got this huge experimentation pipeline. But if I was to draw that analogy to, I don't know, my sales and marketing pipeline, and it was full of thousands of new leads suddenly out of nowhere, but none of them were relevant to me, then I wouldn't regard that as a positive thing, right? I think there's a little bit of, which I'm sure isn't the case at Lloyds, right? But it's like, how do you know these experiments are relevant experiments versus just people going off and doing things, which we've all seen happen, right? When you unleash innovation into a business, it's like, but why the hell did an innovation team work on this problem when we've got these real ones over here? So I don't know if you guys have a structure for that or if you're still experimenting with it, but knowing that they're relevant quality experiments is obviously really key.
Yeah, but I think that if you've determined and you've got sponsorship where to explore and experiment, you're removing that problem. So as I say, I may have say this is an attractive market. If no one's interested in it, I put that to bed and I move on to the next one, because you have to have and often get them to commit money or resource, because I often think even if it's a freebie, there's no skin in the game. So why do they really care? Is find the areas that they are interested in exploring that span both horizons. If there is a link to an attractive market or a potential OPEX saving, then make sure you are presenting a good argument, because I think one of the guys said it in the book, Pirates in the Navy, who's a strategizer, and said, 90% of your job is being a politician. So know your script up front, do your research, and increasingly get the buy-in to be able to continue doing what is you want to do.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think that's a really nice way of summarizing things, Bea, that brings us nicely to an end. I was going to ask you to summarize, and you pretty much just did it there.
In a frustrated, we should do this. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's it can be frustrating at times, but look, this has been a super valuable chat, and I appreciate your time massively. It's it's been amazing to have spent time learning with you on one side of the fence and continuing to learn with you on the other side of the fence. So thank you very much. Right, there's always more to do than we can get done. But thank you very much. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
I just on LinkedIn spend a lot of time there. So yeah, go on and like my posts.
Follow Bea, exactly. Follow Bea online, and thank you very much once again, Bea. For everyone who's enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. We've got a number of really exciting future guests coming up, some of whom are going to build on the things that Bea was just talking about there as well. Others are going to take us into interesting areas around ethics of AI, and a number of other topics as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Bea, and I'll be back soon.
Thank you, Simon.